What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another amazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was the host of Pure Darkness? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. Naruto, only 5 years old, a child. Yet he already knows how cruel the world can be. His parents neglect him in favor of Menma, his brother. The only thing he has to pass the time is a pencil and notebook. Drawing and writing being the only thing he really did, even when most kids his age can't even speak in well-structured sentences. He would have never even knew how to write if it wasn't for the darkness helping him from behind the scenes with certain letters. Looking out his window, Naruto saw his parents training Menma like usual. He frowned at the thought of it all, not really enjoying being pushed to the side like trash even though he was older. It should have been Naruto who got the Kyuubi, but instead it went to Menma. Naruto looked away from the window and back at what he was doing. Knowing there was no use in getting angry over them, Naruto was drawing like usual in his room. Drawing something that in this time and age, to most don't even exist. He was drawing a purple scaly beast with long great wings to allow it to fly. A long purple tail behind it along with great sharp talons that could be used to cut even the strongest of metals. Most would find this odd, but Naruto oddly felt a contempt when seeing the small fairy tale on his page. Almost safe even. While he was drawing, he didn't happen to notice that the darkness was watching him, and it decided that its host was finally ready to have his own dragon. Only a few small changes here and there were needed, but in other words, the dragon its host drew looked fine. The darkness made Naruto pass out so he wouldn't have to deal with the pain and have to see the two heads coming from his back. Once it was done forming the dragon, it went back into Naruto's body. The image of the darkness drawing itself onto Naruto's back. All of this occurring in attempt to hide the true power of the darkness until he was ready, physically and mentally prepared to deal with all of its power and side effects. The dragon, who had finished forming, made its way over to Naruto. Lifting up his shirt and placing a clawed hand on Naruto's chest on the opposite side of his heart. It then gently pushed its claws into Naruto's skin, its claws secreting a dark and thick black substance. The substance stained Naruto's chest, leaving the mark of the dragon, so that way it can better serve its new master. The dragon then disappeared in cloud of black smoke, almost like it was never there in the first place. It would stay close though, close to its master, so that way it can protect him if the time called for it. For now though, would stay out of sight, just like they want. Waking up to the sound of Menma's laughter, the sound ringing off the halls and to his room all the way from the dining room. He also woke up to a throbbing pain in his chest. He could check up on the pain later. For now he had to get out of the house before his parents forced him to spar with his brother. Though it was really more like his brother beating the crap out of him. So doing what any logical 5-year-old would do, he opened his window and jumped out, landing on the branch of a tree next to his window. Running down the trunk of the tree and straight to the forest. Someplace he felt much more at home in than his own house. Once he was a good distance away from his house, he looked back at the window. Seeing the strangest little purple blur that seemed to jump out the window and shut it at the same time, but that couldn't be possible, right? It had to have been the wind or something. Though Naruto didn't have time to gawk at the now closed window since he saw the door to his room open. He took that as a sign to run for the hills and turned around, running deeper into the forest. Finding the symbols that he carved into the trees for navigation. He soon made it to a shaded outcropping that he often traveled to. It being a place he used to calm down and relax in. There was nothing more than the shade of the trees to cover the ground. It giving off a night-like kind of darkness. Though when Naruto entered the area, his chest began to feel heavy. Then a searing pain enveloped the entire right side of his chest. The pain in his chest seemed to only get worse as the searing pain turned into an unbearable pain. Once the pain died down, Naruto began to feel extremely sick. He began to grow dizzy and tried walking over to a tree for support. He didn't make it very far before he tripped on a large branch, causing him to stumble and fall. A clawed purple hand catching him just before he hit the ground, balancing him out and helping him stand. He no longer felt extremely sick, so he focused on the matter at hand. Who had caught him? He looked up only for his eyes to widen as he sees the dragon that he drew in front of him. How? There was no possible way for his drawing to come to life. How could it possibly be standing right here in front of him? Naruto rubbed his eyes and looked at the beast, thinking that maybe he was just tired or Menma's beatings were really starting to affect him. The dragon was still there though and had eventually laid down. It had sensed its master's confusion, so therefore was trying to get him to relax. The dragon got down as low as possible and tilted its head at Naruto. Naruto slowly reached his hand out and pet the small dragon, earning a purr from the fire-breathing beast. Naruto smiled softly at this and sat down in front of the dragon. To the dragon this seemed like a good thing, so it decided to speak to its master. "Hello, master." Naruto's eyes widened and he retracted his hand, being caught off guard by the fact that the beast spoke. "You can speak?" Naruto said warily, looking at the dragon closely. The dragon nodded and stayed in its spot, not wanting to seem threatening in any way. "If you wish for me not to speak, then I will not," the dragon said, and Naruto shook his head slowly. "You just caught me off guard." Naruto looked at the dragon, a look of confusion plastered on his face. "What is your name? So that way I don't have to call you dragon." Naruto waited for a name but looked confused when the dragon merely shook its head. "I do not have a name yet, master. That is for you to decide." Naruto nodded and thought for a bit, crossing his arms and looking down at the ground. Then Naruto looked up and he smiled brightly. "How about Azar? It means fire. Seeing as you are a dragon, you most likely breathe fire." The dragon nodded. "If that is the name you wish for me to have, then I will now be referred to as Azar." Naruto smiled, then held out his hand. Azar tilted his head at him and took his hand. Naruto shook Azar's clawed hand and Azar shook back, not really fully understanding the gesture's purpose. "It is nice to meet you, Azar. Thank you for saving me from falling flat on my face." Azar then smiled a dragon-like smile and nodded his head. "It is an honor to serve by you, master." Naruto scrunched up his face and shook his head. "We're equals, partners. You don't have to call me master. Just call me Naruto." Azar looked a little dumbfounded by this, but it was what his boss Naruto wanted. "It is an honor to serve by you, Naruto. I look forward to our time together." They both looked in each other's eyes and just knew that they were going to be best friends. Walking around the forest, the two just enjoyed each other's company. The dragon, Azar, attacking any small animal that happened to cross their path. Naruto found this quite entertaining, watching the dragon do such. Whenever Naruto asked, the dragon would reply with a simple, "I am only making sure you are safe," but Naruto knew better. The dragon, after all, was still young, therefore needed constant exercise and attention. Naruto didn't mind these facts. He himself was still young. Naruto watched as Azar pounced on a squirrel, growling lowly at it, then releasing it. The small animal then bolts off in a different direction and Naruto shakes his head. Naruto and Azar make it to a small clearing, one where there happened to be a lake and plenty of shade around the edges. A huge tree sitting in the center of it. Naruto walked up to the tree while Azar followed, then getting distracted by a small butterfly that happened to fly across his face. The dragon then going off to chase the butterfly while Naruto looked at the tree. An idea forming in his head. What if they built a treehouse? That way Naruto won't have to live with his family. After all the times he ran away from home and camped out in the forest at night, he should be able to take care of himself. That idea alone sounded amazing. Then he could live his life in peace and not have to deal with all the villagers and his family. Naruto walked over to the lake and saw plenty of fish swimming in it. He could also catch some of the forest animals and cook them. Naruto smiled. This seemed like a great idea. All he would have to do is build the place and bring all of his things here. Naruto jumped in surprise when he heard a splash and looked over to see the dragon had jumped into the water. The dragon had then splashed Naruto with some water and Naruto looked even more surprised. Then he gained a determined look on his face and took off all his clothes besides his underwear and then jumped in. Resurfacing at the top of the water, Naruto then splashes Azar with some water. Azar lets out a dragon-like laugh and splashes Naruto back, causing him to chuckle. They go back and forth splashing each other with water and playing together till the sun started to set. Then they both climbed out of the water and sat near the huge tree in the center of the clearing. Watching the sun set and drying off, the dragon curled up around Naruto and drifted off to sleep. Naruto doing the same and they both fall asleep. Naruto wakes up to see some other animals curled up around then. Some wolves. They had helped keep Naruto warm, seeing as he was still only in his underwear. Smiling, Naruto reached out and petted one of the wolves. earning a small purr from the beast. Naruto just accepted the fact that the animals had come to stay with him. He enjoyed the company. If anything, these animals were more human than those in his village. Those in his village were the real beasts that are mentioned in fairy tales. Naruto sighed, knowing full well that he should go back home. He really didn't want to though, but he knew he should. Naruto stands up. He gets dressed as quietly as possible, but that wasn't quiet enough. As he hears shuffling behind him and he looks back, waking up the wolves and his dragon in the process. They all look at them and Naruto smiles softly back at them. They stand up with him and Naruto shakes his head. Stay here. I am just going home for the rest of the night. Naruto said softly, and the animals whimper in return, not wanting him to go. Naruto just shakes his head and begins walking off. The animals whimper louder in an effort to get him to return, but he continued walking away anyways. Walking back to the compound that he calls home, Naruto walks upstairs and right to his room only to see Menma sitting on his bed. His brother looks at him and frowns, then stands up and walks over to him and grabs him by the collar of his shirt. Where were you? I didn't have anyone to spar with, so I had to practice on a training dummy. Naruto shrugs and Menma frowns deeper and shoves him against the wall. Answer me. I can and will beat you if I need to. Naruto tries to contain his fear. He didn't want that, so he gave the simplest answer and just told him. At a tree. Menma tilts his head, not at all understanding what that meant, and Naruto smirked slightly. Menma saw this though and punched him in the gut, knocking the wind out of Naruto and causing him to hunch over slightly. Then Menma kicked him in the face, most likely leaving a mark as well. Menma leaves blow after blow on Naruto and he did nothing to fight back. After about 10 minutes Menma grew bored of beating him and left the room, leaving Naruto there curled up in a ball crying softly. Naruto slowly got up and began to grab his things. He was not going to stay here any longer. He was going to go live in the forest, where he would train and become strong. Getting all these things together and walking downstairs, Naruto sneaks into his mom and dad's room, going through one of their drawers and stealing some money that he can use to build his new home. Once he got the money, he steals some food as well. He then leaves the compound, not once looking back as he walks into the forest, following the symbol trail back to the clearing, seeing the animals still there asleep, but they wake up once they hear his footsteps. Looking at him, the wolves and Azar run over to him and comfort him. Naruto sits down on the ground and cries more. The wolves lick his cuts and bruises, causing Naruto to smile softly, eventually falling asleep due to exhaustion. The rest of the animals following suit and curling up around him, keeping him warm through the rest of the night. Waking up to a bright morning sun and warmth, Naruto looked around. The animals were asleep, all except one lone wolf that stood off to the side watching everyone else sleep. Naruto seemed confused by this. He tilted his head at the wolf and it walked over, licking his cheek and then laying down with the rest of the animals, falling asleep soon after it did such. It must have been up keeping watch, Naruto thought. Naruto got up and stretched. Then, being careful not to step on anyone, he walked out of the small group and over to the large tree in the center of the clearing. He looked at it, then bowed. He was going to be building his new home here soon. He had to respect the tree. When he bowed, Naruto noticed his beaten up shoes. Then he looked to the rest of his body to see his clothes were in the same destroyed condition. He would have to get new ones. There was nothing else he could do about such an obvious fact. He would go into town later and get new ones, along with supplies to start his build. This was going to take a while, but it was going to be worth it in the end. For now though, he would fish. He would also collect some berries. He was hungry after all. Fishing was something that he did often. He ran away from home many times before to stay in the forest. All those times he learned how to fish by hand. Naruto took all his clothes off except his underwear. Then he waded into the water. He crouched down and waited. It was early out still, and so not many would really be awake. Naruto heard a soft snort behind him and turned around to see his dragon, Azar, waking up. Azar looked at Naruto and got up. He flapped his wings slightly and flew over the wolves that surrounded him, then flew over around Naruto, hovering beside him. As he watched Naruto, "Naruto, what are you doing?" the dragon asked. "Fishing," Naruto said, concentrating on the fish in the small lake. The dragon said nothing after this, just waited to see his friend catch a fish. They sat in silence for a while. Then suddenly a fish jumped up slightly. Naruto quickly took this chance to catch the large fish, grabbing the fish by the tail and holding it as it moved violently in his hands. He then threw it to shore and went back to his crouched position. This went on for some time and eventually Azar joined in, helping catch fish as well so they all could eat. By the end they had 20 large fish, enough for everyone to have two. The wolf pack of 8 and then Naruto and Azar. Naruto and Azar climbed out of the water and onto land. Naruto then starts to walk off to the edges of the clearing. Once there he picks up some sticks and rocks. He walked back over to their pile of fish. A few feet away from it he set the rocks down in a circle-like pattern. Then put the sticks in it. He looked over to Azar and motioned him to come over. The dragon nodded and walked over, then inhaled deeply. When he exhaled, purple and black flames came from its mouth. Lighting the sticks on fire, Naruto looked warily at the flames and then back to the dragon. He sighed and shrugged, not really caring, as he put the fish on sticks and began to cook them. They both sat in silence as Naruto stared at the flames in wonder. They heard the familiar sound of the wolves and looked over in their direction. They woke up one by one and stretched. Naruto smiled at them and waved them over. They came over and smiled wolfish grins and sniffed around. They sat near the fire and the biggest wolf, the alpha, sat next to Naruto. Naruto looked at him and smiled. "How are you doing, small one?" Naruto jumped at the sudden voice and looked at the wolf. He smiled down at him and Naruto's eyes widened. "You can talk to?" Naruto said, tilting his head to look at the wolf. The wolf just shook his head and smiled down at him once more. "It is not that I can speak per se. It is more that you can understand us." Naruto seemed confused by this. "I can understand you?" Naruto said, looking at the large wolf. "Yes, you may not feel it just yet, but there is something about your aura that is allowing you to do such. You are very different. We have not had someone with an aura like yours come to the forest before." Naruto sat and listened, not really fully understanding but trying his best anyways. Normal human auras are white and as they get older they turn gray. Yours, however, is many-colored, though it has a dark glow to it. All the colors are much darker too. I want you to be able to see what we see. You are a strong child, very strong. How would you like to become a part of our pack? You could train with us and grow strong. Have a family. Naruto's eyes widened at this. He never knew that he would get the chance to have a family again. Let alone one that cares. He smiled, tears coming to his eyes as he hugged the large wolf. The wolf hugging back and smiling at Naruto. "I will treat you like one of my own. Once we awaken that power of yours we will see all that you can do. You will be a fine pup indeed." Naruto nodded and the rest of the wolves, who were all listening, smiled and hugged Naruto too. All of them saying things along the lines of, "Welcome to the family," or, "It is nice to have a new pup around here." The fish, that was now finally done, was eaten quickly by the group. Then after that the alpha stood up. "Naruto, to become a part of the family you must first be accepted by the forest. Walk over to the tree. When you get there place your hand on the center of it. The rest will come naturally." Naruto nods and walks over to the tree. He was a little nervous but he did what he was told. He placed his hand in the center of the tree and sighed, waiting for whatever was going to happen. He waited for a while and for a bit nothing happened. Then suddenly he felt dizzy. He felt the world spin around him and felt like he was going to fall over. His eyes went out of focus so he could not see what was going on around him. His hearing also seemed to be failing him as it sounded like he was underwater. He did not see the wolves walk over to the tree and sit around it in a semicircle. They all sat behind Naruto and the alpha walked over to him. Strange markings appearing on the wolf's fur. The alpha then scratched his front leg, it bleeding slightly while he walked over to the tree. His blood dripped onto the ground and went around the tree, making a symbol appear around the tree. The forest grew dark and it seemed that the only things there were the tree, the wolves, and Naruto. The symbol then began to glow brightly and the alpha's blood slowly made its way up Naruto. The blood then going into Naruto's body, filling his very being with the alpha's blood. All while this happened Naruto seemed to be having a conversation with the tree. He felt like he understood it as he watched it sway, captivated by its absolute beauty. He felt like he was one with his surroundings and the forest. He felt like he could feel what the forest felt. He felt like he was finally able to breathe for the first time. He finally felt free. On the outside Naruto's body was going through a change. Strange symbols similar to the ones on the wolves appeared over his skin. A tail and ears similar to the wolves grew on him. His hair had changed as well. From the bright yellow that it used to be to a now shiny white. His ears and tail also being white to match his hair. The wolves knew that Naruto to easily make these ears and tail disappear with the right amount of training. They also knew that he could shift into a wolf, also with the right amount of training. For now though, he would be stuck in this hybrid state until he was trained properly. As for his hair, they do not know what had happened, nor do they know if it can be fixed. The transformation though was complete. The forest had accepted Naruto with open arms. If not, Naruto would have been killed during the transformation. The wolves all stepped away. The glow from the tree subsided and the blood disappeared. The symbols on the wolves however stayed. Naruto's hand fell from the and he stood there not moving for a while. Then he blinked. He looked around and then looked down at his hands. Seeing the strange symbols on his skin, he didn't mind it though. His mind had been opened up to a new world that he had been oblivious to before. He had noticed something move behind him and he saw the tail. He felt something move on his head as well. Reaching up on top of his head he felt the two fluffy ears. He smiled slightly. He was a part of the family now. He didn't have to be alone anymore. He turned around and smiled at his new family. They all smiled back and he ran over and hugged them all. The alpha female or the Luna grabbed him by the back of his kimono. Something that he had just realized he had on. He doesn't know how he got it or where it came from, but he did not mind it. She walked over to an area away from the others and sat him down. Then she laid down behind him and curled up around him. Naruto just realized that he felt extremely drained. He laid down with his new mother and closed his eyes. Azar had came over and curled up beside him. They all drifted off into a peaceful slumber. The other wolves talking with the alpha over the good news of a new pup. They had all agreed to just let him rest for now though. Tomorrow they would let him get used to the new changes that had happened to him. The day after, training would begin. Waking up, Naruto looked around. The pack was all laid around and about. All over the area in a circle-like formation. Probably guessed to make sure nothing happened to Naruto. He was their new pup after all. They had to make sure he was safe. It was mid-afternoon when Naruto awoke. He yawned, his sharper canines showing when he does so. He then lays back down and tries to sleep more. Then he feels something lick his face and he groans and tries to push whatever was licking his face away from him. It doesn't work because it seems that only made whatever it was lick him more. He opens his eyes and looks up to see his mom licking his face. So in return Naruto hides his face in her fur, trying to avoid her affection and sleep as best as possible. She laughs a wolfish laugh and continues her affectionate assault on Naruto. Eventually he gave up on sleeping. He knew that he wasn't going to sleep anymore, no matter how hard he would try. He sits up again and looks at his mom and pout, playing at his lips. "Why did you do that, Mom? I was trying to sleep." Naruto said, his eyebrows knitting together in frustration. She only laughs more and looks at him. "Pups need exercise. Not only that, but you should really start getting used to all the changes you went through. Sleeping won't help you do that," she says, a smiling tugging at her lips. Naruto groans and then sighs. He stands up and in the process wakes up Azar, the dragon, looking up at him and then standing as well. Looking around the forest, Naruto noticed that all his senses were heightened. He could see, hear, and smell things he never could before. Or at least couldn't smell, see, and hear unless he was close. He began to walk around, taking in as many small details that he could. Then he looked back at his mom. He wanted to explore, but he knew he wouldn't be able to go alone. She got the hint and stood up, prepared to watch and protect her pup if needed. Without thinking, Naruto crouched down and began sniffing around, walking slowly around the field, remembering the scent so he would be able to make it back here if he were alone. Then he got up and ran off in a random direction. His mother followed close behind along with his dragon. Naruto took the time to admire the forest in a new light. He looked at all the flowers, along with all the small designs on them that he couldn't see before. He reached out to a certain flower. It was a patch of flowers, really. They seemed to glow slightly and somehow Naruto felt like he should touch one. The flowers were purple, with many other colors glowing around them. They were growing in the shade of a tree. Looking around, Naruto noticed that these flowers seemed to stop where the shade stopped, not going into broad daylight. As Naruto reached out to touch the flower, it grew towards him. Like it was reaching out to him too. Just a little bit more and he would have made contact with the flower. He couldn't remember if it was him who touched the flower first or if it was the flower that touched him first. All he knows is that once he did, something change. The symbols that had been on his skin began to change before his very eyes. They still looked the same. But this time he could understand it. The symbols printed on his skin said something. They meant something. The guardian of the forest, he shall be the strongest of them all, he read out loud. He looked back at his mom and he could read her symbols too. Leader of the wolf pack. Now that he thought about it, everyone in the pack had symbols on them. Were these their roles? Naruto sat confused for a moment. His mom seemed to already know what happened but wanted him to speak first. He was about to ask when he heard something. His ears flicking in the direction of the sound as he looked in that direction. His tail swayed slightly and, for a second, he just stood there. Listening for any more sound. He heard the sound again and he bolted off in that direction. His mom following close behind him as he ran. Azar flying beside him to keep up. Once they got in range of the sound by about a mile they slowed down. Naruto wanted to make sure they weren't heard by whatever it was making the sound. They were near the edge of the forest by now, so they knew it was highly possible for them to run into people. With that thought in mind, Naruto stayed in the shadows. His mom and Azar doing the same. They saw some kids. 2 really. None of them Naruto knew, but they seemed to be up to no good. Their charca was next to none, so they must have been villagers. What could they be doing out here? The thought of them trying to hurt the forest, his second home, scared him deeply. It caused his hairs to stand up on end and his tail to fluff up slightly. He was scared, yes. This is the first time he had been through a situation like this. Pushing those thoughts aside, Naruto listened to the boys closely. Do you really think some wolves live out here? Why would they live here? I don't know, but wouldn't it be cool if we caught one? We could skin it and take the meat to our parents. It's getting late. Can we come back tomorrow? I don't want to be late going back home. The other boys sighed and nodded. Knowing it was probably best, they both went home. They walked out of the forest and Naruto growled. He didn't like their idea, nor would he let it happen. He was going to train and become strong. So that way he could protect the things he cared about. He looked at his mom. A determined look in his blue eyes. She understood why and they all began the trip back to the center of the forest. Today, training will start. Not tomorrow. Today. There was no room for discussion by anyone. Naruto had made up his mind. He was going to protect his family. He was going to protect his new home. Even if it kills him. Once back in the clearing, the Luna runs over to her mate. He was in a group with other wolves. Talking about something that Naruto didn't really focus on or care to. They needed to start training. We had to protect the forest. Now, the Luna rubs up against her mate. Nudging him slightly but in a rushed manner. He looks at her, confusion in his big wolf eyes. She says something to him and his eyes widen. Then he looks over to Naruto. He was pacing back and forth quickly. Running his hands through his hair occasionally. They could tell he was worried and anxious. They also knew he would be. They just didn't think this would all happen so soon. Naruto's mother and father walk back over to him after his father says something to the other wolves, causing them to all run off in random directions. Once back over with Naruto, his mother licks his cheek in an attempt to calm him. That did little to help him. His tail was still puffed up and his hairs still stood on end. His ears flicked every now and again in all directions, making sure he didn't hear anything that would be suspicious. Pup, you must calm down some. If you don't and you try to rush training, we won't be able to train you properly. Naruto's father says, looking at his pup stress so soon. He didn't enjoy it one bit, but he knew that if they didn't train him, his stress would only get worse with every passing second. Naruto sighs heavily and looks at his father with determination in his eyes. His eyes glowed a slight black when Naruto looked at his parents. They seemed a little taken aback. They didn't think he would be so upset that he began to tap into the power that lays dormant within himself. They realized in that moment just how serious this situation was to him, and the two parents looked at each other, then pulled Naruto over to the lake. Naruto was a little confused, but he complied with them. Naruto was then told to strip naked. He looked at his parents completely shocked. He did not know why he was being asked to do such, but he knew he didn't want to do it. Even if they were his parents, he was not going to comply so easily. What? Why? I'm not doing it without a reason. Naruto said, crossing his arms, a look of pure defiance on his face. His parents sighed in unison. Then without warning his mother pounced on him. His father chuckled and sat down watching the situation with amusement present on his face. Mom, what are you doing? Naruto completely panicked and tried to get away. She only dragged him back and took off his kimono and his underwear, Naruto panicking and uses his tail to hide his parts. Naruto then looks at his mom and growls loudly. I could have done that myself, Mom. She laughs and licks his cheek. Naruto wades into the water and then he looks back at his parents. So what? I'm taking a bath? Naruto sees the rest of the pack come back and carry plants and leaves with them, along with some other things that Naruto couldn't recognize. The items are then dropped into the water and the water begins to glow. Naruto's eyes widen and he looks at his parents and the rest of the pack. He was about to ask them what was happening when he was suddenly pulled underwater by some invisible force. Naruto panicked and tried to swim back to the surface, but that didn't seem to help at all as he was pulled further and further under the water. This was it, he thought. I'm going to die. I might as well make it easy for myself. Naruto closed his eyes and stopped holding his breath. He inhaled and let the water fill his lungs, giving into the darkness as he relaxed completely. Naruto drifted there, peace flooding his system. After a while of dying, Naruto opened his eyes and looked around. He was just floating there and he could breathe? Naruto was a little confused by this but didn't question it. Naruto still seemed to be going down, so Naruto decided to turn around and swim down too. He seemed to be getting closer to some surface of some sort because there seemed to be light shining above the water. Now that he thinks about it, when did the lake get so deep? Before he could stand in it and it would come above his waist when he was in the shallows. When he went in he made sure to stay in the shallow water, so how is it that now he can fully swim in the water and not see the land above him? When he looked back the way he came he could only see darkness. How is it possible that the world he was once in before suddenly vanished? Or is it that he just got turned upside down somehow? Naruto realized that he had finally made it to the surface. Breaking the top of the pool of water, Naruto gasped and took in a huge gulp of air. Sure, he could somehow breathe underwater, but it still didn't feel right. He looked over to the shore and swam to it, quickly getting out of the water that he thought would kill him. He closed his eyes and just enjoyed the feel of solid land beneath him. He opened his eyes and looked at the sky. It was nighttime. How? When he got into the water it was mid-afternoon. How could it possibly be nighttime? He looked at the full moon in awe. Even though it shouldn't be there, it was still beautiful. He looked around him and realized that he was no longer in the forest he knew. He was still in a forest surrounded by trees. The trees and bushes looked amazing. So beautiful and full of life. There was a small building. Naruto didn't quite understand what it was doing there and there were no people around, so where could it have come from? He got up slowly and looked down at himself. He had clothes on. They just weren't the normal kimono he had worn previous to entering the water. Image, I am a lazy author today, had lots of schoolwork, Sawi. He seemed confused to say the least. He looked around and walked over to the structure. It was made out of some sort of marble. It shined in the light of the moon. Naruto walked around it, then a bright light shone, blinding him momentarily. Then he saw a swan? Naruto was completely baffled by this. What was even going on? He didn't even know what to think anymore. Maybe he could go back the way he came. Naruto turned around fully prepared to go back until he heard a voice. I am sorry, small one. You cannot go back until you are ready. Naruto looked back at the swan. Pure confusion written all over his face. Naruto then nodded slowly. Come, small one, it is time we awaken your aura and open your eyes. Naruto deadpanned and nodded again. Open his eyes? They look pretty open right now. The swan began walking off towards the forest and Naruto followed behind closely. He did not know what or where this place was. Getting lost didn't seem like a good choice. They kept walking till they got to a cave. The swan then turned around and looked at him. You will stay here for 3 days. Here you will overcome your physical capabilities. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. 3 whole days? How could he possibly survive 3 days without food or water? If you leave the cave before time is up, you are admitting defeat, so you will never be able to protect those you cherish. The swan walked off, then disappeared in that bright flash of light, leaving Naruto all alone, in a place he was unfamiliar with. Naruto sat down in the cave. What was he supposed to do for 3 days? Naruto looked around the cave for anything to do. He sighed and laid down on the cold hard ground. If he was going to do anything he might as well sleep. The swan wouldn't have put him here if it wasn't safe. Right? Naruto woke up to see that he was still in the cave. He looked around more and sighed. Then he heard something snort. Azar? He looked over at a dark corner to see his dragon friend looking at him. Azar, how did you get here? It doesn't matter, it's just nice to have someone to talk to now. Naruto got up and began walking over to his friend. Then Azar growled loudly, stopping Naruto mid-step. Azar? What's wrong? Naruto asked, looking at his dragon friend full of concern. Then Azar lunged at him, pinning him to the ground easily. Naruto's eyes filled with shock and he looked back at his friend. Hey Azar? Let go. Why are you doing this? The dragon, however, did not answer. Azar just growled louder at him and scratched him across his face, leaving 3 long gashes across Naruto's cheek. Naruto's eyes filled with fear and confusion as he looked back at his friend. Tears filled his eyes as he looked back at him. Hey Azar, why would you hit me? What did I do? Azar just raised another clawed hand and scratched him across his arm. Naruto screamed. The pain he felt was something he was supposed to be used to, and yet it hurt more when it came from someone he thought he could trust. Azar continued, leaving long gashes and cuts on Naruto, ripping his skin off slowly as he attacked. Naruto's screams never ceased until he began to choke on his own blood. A gurgling sound filling the cave as he felt his life slip away from him. Then, darkness. Naruto woke up screaming and crying as he remembered the nightmare that just happened. He was terrified, horrified, at what just happened. Naruto curled up into a ball and cried silently. He was shaking violently and he feared that if he looked up he would see his dragon friend, ready to kill him again in the same painful way. Naruto touched all the places where he got cutted in the dream. He didn't find a single cut or scratch there, or anywhere. This didn't make the dream feel any less real. Naruto didn't think he would be able to fall asleep after that. He just sat there. He didn't know how long he was sitting there, but that's what he did. Unmoving as his eyes darted around the cave. He looked over to the entrance of the cave and realized that the moon was still out. Would the moon always be out? Is there no sun? If there isn't, how would he be able to tell time? Was there really any way to tell at all? He looked back into the cave, looking at the deeper, darker parts of it, and he shook slightly. He inched closer to the edge of the cave where there was more light for him to see with. He really wanted to run out of the cave and never look back, but he knew that if he did that he wouldn't be able to protect his family. Naruto sat there quietly, the nightlife comforting him slightly. He knew that this was going to be a long 3 days, but there was nothing he could do about it. Then after a while, Naruto got bored of just sitting there. He looked deeper into the cave and inhaled deeply. He decided that he was going to venture deeper into it. He wanted to see if there was anything else there. He stood up and began walking deeper. Then he heard a voices to be exact. Turn back. You are weak. You are not ready for the power you wield. Hearing the voices made him tense up slightly. He looked around quickly, then began to move again, continuing his quest deeper into the cave. The voices grew louder and louder the deeper he got, and eventually they were screaming. Naruto tried covering his ears, but the sound seemed to be coming from his head. He grew a headache and began to get dizzy. Maybe he should turn around. Maybe the voices were right and he wasn't ready. Naruto dropped to his knees and looked deeper into the cave. It seemed endless, like he would never reach the end, and it would only cause him more pain to try to reach for something that isn't there. The voices were still screaming at him to go back, though he couldn't move anymore. He felt exhausted, like walking anymore would kill him. He sat there, his eyes going out of focus as his mind slowly slipped into the welcoming darkness. Just before his eyes slid closed, he heard something. It sounded far away compared to the screaming in his ears, but he still heard it. Don't give in. This is only what they want. You're so close, Naruto. Naruto blinked his eyes a few times, trying to get the black dots that clouded his vision to go away. That voice, though small, had gotten his attention. It made him want to keep going. Maybe that voice was there the entire time and he just couldn't hear it because of all the noise. Slowly Naruto used the wall for support as he stood up. He could do this. He would do this. He felt like he could overcome this. He just had to persevere, he had to stay determined. Now I couldn't help that reference. Naruto's eyes glowed slightly and he stood up with newfound strength. Naruto traveled deeper into the cave, not once thinking about turning back. The voices were still screaming, but as he continued they got quieter and the one that was telling him to continue grew louder. The farther he went, the stronger he felt. He could do anything, he could protect those he loved. This was nothing. He is stronger than this. He will overcome. Naruto felt something inside himself shift and he saw his skin glow slightly. On his arm a tattoo of a wolf with wings appeared right on his shoulder. He knew that this meant that he had done something good. Then he heard the voice that had been encouraging him. You passed the first test, Naruto. Congratulations. Naruto smiled brightly. He had done it. He passed the first test. He wondered what the second test could possibly be. What could this cave possibly have in store for him now? Naruto sat deep in the cave. He felt at peace being so deep inside it. Though he was beginning to grow bored once again. He hadn't slept much after that nightmare and he really didn't want to, but, without his consent, his eyes began to droop. He was really hoping that he wouldn't have that nightmare again. Naruto sighed as he stood up. He decided that he should exercise. This way it would wake him up and he wouldn't fall asleep with the chance of having a nightmare again. Naruto began to run laps around the cave. He ran near the opening of the cave but was careful not to get too close. His eyes had gotten adjusted to the darkness and he didn't want to harm them. After he ran a few laps he began doing push-ups. These tasks were waking him up and keeping him occupied. He switched from push-ups to jumping jacks. Then jumping jacks to handstands. This way he can learn how to keep better balance. Every now and again he would take a break from such tasks. Though when he took a break he didn't stop. Instead he would do some yoga to relax his muscles. After that he would start back up again. Doing push-ups, jumping jacks, handstands, handstand push-ups, running laps around the cave. He wouldn't take a break until he was drenched in sweat and could barely move. After a while he was too tired to do anything. He lay down on the cave floor out of breath and breathing heavily. He looked at the ceiling of the cave and closed his eyes. Immediately falling asleep there, darkness filling his vision as he passed out. Naruto woke up again still looking at the cave ceiling. He sighed and closed his eyes again. Then he heard a growl. His eyes widened and he looked over to the dark corner once again. He saw the familiar form of his dragon friend and he panicked. He quickly got up and ran deeper into the cave trying to get away from what he thought was his friend. His friend had caught up to him though, tackling him to the ground and forcing him to lay on his stomach. Azar dug his claws into Naruto's back leaving long claw marks in his back. Naruto screamed and tears fell from his eyes at an alarming rate. He wasn't used to the nightmare yet and was hoping that it wouldn't happen again. Naruto tried crawling out of his friend's grasp. His friend only dug his claws deeper into his skin. Naruto screamed and his friend inhaled deeply, blowing fire onto Naruto's back, burning the skin on his back. Naruto's screams only grew louder as his friend continued to burn him. Naruto could feel himself slipping into the darkness again, but just before he could, Azar stopped burning him. Azar flipped Naruto over onto his back and Naruto hissed in pain. He tried to turn back over but Azar just dug his claws into his shoulders. The dragon dug his claws deep into Naruto's chest and ripped his organs out. Naruto's eyes faded as the light slowly disappeared from them. Naruto coughed up blood and his head leaned to the side. Naruto watched as his blood pooled around him. It felt warm against his skin, like he was taking a warm bath. His mind fell into darkness as his eyes slid closed. Naruto woke up in a cold sweat and breathing heavily. He took off his shirt and felt his back, feeling his smooth skin and sighing in relief. He wiped his forehead of the sweat on his skin and sat there trying to regain his breath. He wanted to get up and begin exercising but he knew he wouldn't get very far if he couldn't breathe. An idea came to Naruto as he decided that he would meditate so he could get proper breathing techniques. Naruto sat in the middle of the cave and straightened his back out. He sat criss-cross and laid his hands palm up on his knees. He closed his eyes and began breathing in and out, trying to get his breathing under control after the nightmare. After a while of sitting there and breathing, Naruto got up and began exercising again. He would go until he was out of breath, then he would begin breathing again. He was getting hungry and thirsty and didn't know where to find food. Looking out into the night he saw lots of berries. His mouth watered at the thought. He shook his head and turned away from the potential food. Instead he exercised and meditated to take his mind off it. He did this same routine for what felt like hours. He imagined being full the entire time he did it, knowing that if he thought about being hungry would only make him more hungry. He imagined eating a full meal and laying in a warm bed. Slowly after a while, he didn't feel so hungry or tired anymore. Almost like he tricked his mind into thinking that he was resting, that he had more energy than what he really had. He began to run faster and push himself harder. The more he pushed himself, the more energy he felt like he had. He kept running and pushing. He still continued to meditate to keep his breathing steady. He did this constant routine for what felt like hours, days maybe. Yet he just didn't feel like stopping. He enjoyed the feel of his blood pumping in his veins. After a while he was running laps again, he began to glow faintly. He stopped to see what was happening again, and when he looked at his arm, he had another tattoo. This time it was a tattoo of a forest with a large tree in the middle. The moon and the lake in it as well. The forest glowed slightly, then returned to black. Naruto smiled. He had done it again. He had completed another test. The second test. He grinned and jumped around the cave, happy with himself. The voice appearing to congratulate him once again. Good job, Naruto. The second test is over. Now will you be able to conquer the final test? Use what you have learned. You have already faced the third test before. He had already faced the third test before? That doesn't make any sense. Wasn't this going in order? What was the third test then? After he finishes this test, will he be allowed to leave? Naruto sighed and sat down, leaning against the cave walls. All he knew though, is that he had to be ready for it. If he wasn't, then he will just have to try again until he passes. He will get out of this cave soon. He will protect his family and the forest. He has done all of this to become strong for them, for everyone, but mainly for himself. Naruto was continuing his usual routine. He couldn't tell what the test might have been. The only hint he was given was that he faced it before. He had done multiple things in this cave that had been challenging, so to him that was a pretty bad hint. Naruto didn't sleep as much, seeing as he knew how to trick his body into thinking that he did. Sleep had slowly become an unnecessary thing. Naruto sat down to meditate again. He had thought that maybe if he kept doing all the things that he did, then the third test would make itself known to him. Yet he feels like he did the same things over and over for hours now. Naruto punched the cave walls. He was frustrated, to say the least. He wanted to know what he wasn't doing right. Why hasn't he seen the third test yet? Did he already see it when he was doing all the things he did but didn't notice it? Really, how hard is this third test? Naruto knew he had gotten stronger. Much stronger than what he was before. Yet now he couldn't find a stupid test? Naruto growled and looked at the ground. His ears were flat and pulled back slightly in frustration. His tail swishing violently behind him. He sat down and sighed heavily. He seemed to be sighing a lot lately when he entered this cave. He can only keep himself entertained for so long. He is still a kid. 5 years old still. How is he going to figure out whatever this test did? This is like growing up. Even though he sort of already had to grow up some when his parents had his brother beat him and things of such a manner. Naruto shivered when he recalled the day he left his house to come live in the woods. He wasn't too happy about that, but at least now he should be able to defend himself. Naruto lays down on the cave floor and looks up at the ceiling. He has taken up doing this when he was fully stumped and had trained all day. Training was fun, he just needed to be able to do something else once in a while. Even though this usually resulted in him being extremely bored. Naruto curled up slightly and hugged his fluffy tail closely, using it to keep himself warm as he looked back at the cave entrance. He wanted to leave. He wanted to see his family. How did time even work here? It seemed like it was always the same time. He never saw the full moon move from its high peak in the sky, as an eternal night had taken up its keep. Naruto got up and sat close to the entrance of the cave. None of the temptations of leaving got to him anymore because he knew why he was here. He made himself stronger and he felt like he was ready to travel outside of the cave. Though he knows he is not allowed to leave till the 3 days are up, and during that time he had tests to pass. I will let you all know now. I had to take a test and I had to close out all tabs on my computer. I had in turn lost half of the damn chapter. I am legit crying, I cannot believe it's gone. So if the rest seems a bit rushed or doesn't sound good, it is because of that reason. I am sorry for my inability to keep things. Semicolon dash semicolon closing parenthesis. After that he would protect the things he cares about and make sure his new family stays safe. He doesn't know what he would do if he lost them. Naruto grew angry just thinking about losing them because he was too weak to protect them. They are his saviors, his world is that forest now. If he ever lost that, he would be losing himself. Something that would be catastrophic to all others who interacted with him. Naruto began to study all of the rough parts of the cave walls and all of the rocks laid around it. He didn't want to trip over any of them, nor did he wish to scratch up his back if he decided to lean against the cave walls. He had grown somewhat fond of the cave. It somehow taught him a lot without even having to do anything. What was it that made this cave so special anyways? How did it make all those voices? Make it seem endless? How is it giving him these nightmares? Naruto sighed and yawned slightly. Laying down has made him tired and he knows that he should probably get up and move around, but he hasn't slept much as it is. He is still a child and needs his rest. Though he knows he'll regret it when the nightmares come, he let his eyes slide closed and he relaxed slightly, using his tail for warmth as he slipped into another nightmare-filled sleep. Waking up, Naruto looked around the cave. He already knew what was going to happen next before he heard the loud growl come from a dark corner. Naruto stiffened and stood up, running over to the cave entrance and staying in the light of the moon. His friend would always come from a dark corner, so maybe if he stayed in the light it would be better? He smiled triumphantly when his friend did not come into the light, but then frowned, his eyes widening as the light slowly retreated and his friend inched closer with every passing moment. Naruto didn't have much time as he had to think quick on his feet. He looked around quickly and saw a rock near the entrance of the cave. Naruto's eyes widened in realization as he remembered that rock had been there before. It was in the exact place that it was in the cave when he fell asleep. If that's the case, then that means that this cave might be an exact replica of the real one. Naruto looked around as he began identifying parts of the cave that he remembered had rocks or nicks in the wall. He didn't want to hurt his friend, but at this point he had to come to terms with the fact that this is not in fact his friend. Just a mere copy of him. A fake. Naruto picked up the rock and threw it at the dragon. It didn't hit him and may have only distracted him for a second, but that was all the time Naruto needed to sprint to the next rock, Azar soon following after him. Naruto picked up the next rock and threw it at his friend, this time hitting him square in the face. Naruto cheered silently as he ran over to the wall, remembering that it had a few pointy parts on it. His dragon charged him and lunged at him, Naruto jumping out of the way last minute. Watching his friend collide with the wall, the dragon became disoriented as it stumbled around for a second. Naruto took this chance to pick his dragon friend up and ram him against the wall. He had then used this chance to pick up a sharp pointed rock and aimed it at his friend. He was going to end this once and for all. Naruto stabbed the rock through his dragon friend's belly, that being the only soft spot where the rock could get through, the rest of Azar's body being covered in scales. Naruto tore through the soft flesh and then dropped his friend to the ground. Naruto was breathing heavily and turned around and looked away. Even if this wasn't real, he didn't want to see his friend bleed out in front of him. Naruto walked towards the entrance of the cave in silence, turning his back on his friend's corpse. This, however, in this situation, was a bad choice. He had failed to see his dragon friend rise up and take new form. He looked exactly like Naruto, just everything on him was black. This second version of Naruto chuckled evilly. Naruto whipped his head around and looked at him. He was questioning what had happened but felt like this wasn't the proper time to be worried about that. "Who are you?" Naruto said, stepping forward slightly. He was prepared to fight if he must. He did not know if this look-alike was a friend or foe. "Who am I? I'm you. I'm every dark thought and wish. Every shadow under one's bed and in one's head. I am what you seek and what you must keep. I am power. The power that you hide away inside of you. I'ma call him Da Dark One, or the Dark Side. You guys can decide that for future chapters, hey." The darker version of Naruto said as he walked slowly towards Naruto. "You can run from me, but you will never escape me. You have two choices. Accept this power you hold or reject it. If you accept it, you will become stronger than everyone, the strongest being ever to exist. If you reject it, it will slowly corrupt your mind and destroy you from the inside out. It will become uncontrollable and will run rampant." Naruto nodded and walked closer to the darker version of himself. He really wasn't left much wiggle room, but he already knew what he wanted from the start. Naruto held out his hand towards the darker version of himself. The darker Naruto took Naruto's hand and slowly disappeared into Naruto in a swirl of black mist. Naruto's eyes glowed and he dropped to the ground, his eyes filling with darkness as he passed out. Waking up inside the cave, Naruto noticed the faint glow around himself. He looked down at his arm to see the solar system appear on his arm. They each glowed their respective colors, then the tattoo faded back to black. Naruto smiled, then jumped up and cheered. He did it. He finished the final test. Naruto felt as giddy as a schoolgirl. The tattoos were proof that he is strong. Naruto's celebration was cut short due to a sudden bright light shining around the room. Naruto was forced to cover his eyes and look away. When it died down, the swan was there. Naruto stared at the swan, tilting his head slightly. Congratulations, Naruto, I knew you would pass these tests with flying colors. Naruto's eyes widened. You're the voice. The one who has been talking to me this whole time. The swan nodded and another flash of light filled the cave. When it died down, a lady was left in the place of the swans. She was a short girl. She had wings on her back and wore a dress that exposed her legs. She wore a bracelet and a headpiece, along with a necklace and some sort of belt that went around her waist. She had big blue eyes and blonde, almost white, hair. Naruto stared at her in awe as he listened to her speak. I am very proud of you, Naruto. I have watched you all throughout your time in this cave, and for someone so young you are very strong. I have never met anyone else like you, nor have I ever seen such perseverance. You are now ready to go back home. The rest of your training is up to you, young one. I was merely here to assist you on your path. Naruto nodded slowly as he watched her walk out of the cave and down a path, stopping to make sure Naruto did not get lost. Naruto walked to the edge of the cave entrance and stood there for a second. He was not sure if he felt like leaving, but he knew it was necessary if he wanted to protect his family. Stepping outside the cave slowly, Naruto followed. They walked back to the lake where Naruto had first emerged from and smiled softly. Thank you. I learned a lot because of you, Naruto said, smiling at the lady. I have taught you nothing. You have learned all of these things on your own. She then disappeared in another flash of bright light and Naruto shakes his head. She seems to enjoy big entrances and exits. Now that he is standing here with the choice to go home, he realizes something. If he stayed here for 3 days, then doesn't that mean that those kids already attacked his family? Naruto panicked and jumped into the water quickly. He was not about to lose his family just because he wasn't there to save them. That will be the one thing he will never forgive. Naruto swam through the water as fast as he could. He was not ready to lose the only family that cared about him. He looked up, seeing light shine over the surface of the water. He was close, he knew that very well. Even so, fear clenched at his chest as he pushed himself to go faster. He had to admit though, that place, where the moon was always in the sky, had become a second home to him. He felt connected to it regardless of the fact that his home lay in another world. As Naruto reached the top of the lake, he swam there for just a second, staying in this watery void-like space as he looked at the surface, sticking his hand through it. Would anything have changed when he gets back? He was a little scared to go through, but he knew he had to. Breaking the surface of the water, Naruto emerged slowly. It was daytime. He didn't see anyone around either. That thought worried him. What if he was too late? Naruto quickly swam over to the edge of the lake and got out. His clothes had stayed the same from when he was in that other dimension. This was better than coming back and being fully naked, so Naruto was not complaining. Naruto walked around the area slowly. Everything seemed to be fine. Just no one was around. Sniffing around, Naruto got a whiff of the scent of one of the pack members. It seemed to be a few hours old, but besides that, it was somewhat recent. He followed the scent deeper into the woods, making sure that he didn't lose it. The more he followed it, the stronger it got. He was getting pretty deep in the woods. He wasn't accustomed to being this far in. He didn't have his symbols this far out, so there was no way he could use them. After a while of running, Naruto made it to the end of the scent. He was relieved to see one of his pack members, but was still worried as to why he didn't see the rest. He ran over to the wolf and hugged them tightly. The wolf, who had smelt the scent of the pup, had smiled and licked Naruto's cheek, then nudged his head slightly. Naruto could tell that the wolf was happy to see him as well. Naruto could tell by the amount of aura coming off this wolf that they were the beta. Naruto had smiled more than a serious look came over his face. Excuse me, beta, but do you know where everyone else is? The beta smiled and then howled loudly. There were some howls received in return as Naruto knew what the howl said. He was calling everyone back to come and see him. Naruto smiled happily. He was ready to see the rest of his family as he had missed them greatly. Naruto sat on the floor and waited. He was excited to say the least. His tail wagging happily and his ears flicked slightly. The first wolf he saw was his mom. Naruto jumped up and ran over to her, hugging her tightly and snuggling into her fur. He was happy to finally see his mom again. He had gotten very attached to all of them in the past few days. She licked his ears and smiled down at him. "My pup is finally back. I'm so proud of you." Naruto smiled and rubbed the back of his head. While doing that action, Naruto had gotten a quick look at his arm. The tattoos, they were all gone. He didn't see them anymore. Not even the ones he had after he got accepted into the pack. His sun-kissed skin had paled slightly due to the fact that he was in the dark for so long. He didn't worry though. He knew that the tattoos were still there somehow. Just that they weren't visible right now. Naruto snuggled closer to his mom, purring softly when she comforted him. Naruto heard paw steps come up behind his mom and looked up to see his dad smiling down at him. Naruto smiled back and his father nuzzled him affectionately, then sat down along with his mom. Naruto sat down with them and smiled brightly. That was short-lived as he got tackled by a flying purple ball. Groaning slightly, Naruto looked up to see his dragon friend on him. Flashbacks of the nightmare filled Naruto's mind and he backed away quickly from his friend. Everyone looked at him a little weird and Azar whimpered when his friend moved away from him. Naruto took the time to calm down, some not enjoying the fact that he couldn't get along with his first real friend due to the nightmares. Once he calmed down, he reminded himself that this was a friend and he slowly got up and hugged Azar. He was a little tense and he tried to relax more, but he really couldn't. "Naruto?" His mom called out to him and he turned around to look at her. "Yay, Mom?" He turned around to his mom and tilts his head at her. "Don't force yourself to do something you're not ready to do yet." Naruto nods and walks over to his mom and sits next to her, snuggling deep into her fur. He was really tired and felt like he would be able to sleep in peace for once. Closing his eyes, he lets his mind slip into the welcoming darkness of sleep. Falling into a peaceful slumber, Naruto was awoken by his friend, Azar, due to the fact that he kept nudging him with his snout. Naruto cracked one eye open and looked at Azar, clearly annoyed with his constant pestering. Once Azar saw that his friend was up, Azar had jumped up and run around the field, showing that he was up and ready to play. "Come on, Naruto. You've been sleeping for hours. Don't you feel like training? Or exploring?" Azar said, a little too much excitement in his voice. Naruto wasn't happy with having to get up, so he did what any other 5-year-old would do. He laid back down and ignored him. Naruto curled up and relaxed against his mom. He just wanted to rest. Something he has not gotten for 3 days. Azar, however, had other plans and he began to poke and nudge at Naruto once more. Naruto used his tail to block the annoyance, growling slightly at his friend in an attempt to tell him to leave him alone. Azar didn't stop though and Naruto was getting to his wits' ends. Eventually Naruto got up and looked at his friend, anger evident on his face when he looked at him. Naruto then walked over to the other side of the field, laying in the shade of a tree as he curled up once more and closed his eyes. Azar walked over to Naruto and lay down in front of him, whimpering slightly as he crawled closer slowly. Naruto heard this and sighed heavily. "I would guess that now would be a good time for you to practice using your power." Naruto's eyes snapped open and he sat up looking around. He wasn't too sure if he heard that right. It sounded like he heard the darker version of himself a moment ago. "You are correct, you did hear me, Naruto." This time Naruto jumped up. He understood that there was a darker part of himself that he had to get under control, but he didn't think it was actually a physical being or voice that is now attached to him. He was guessing that hearing this voice would become a normal occurrence, but he knew there was nothing else that could really be done about it. "So hearing you will become a normal thing, isn't that right, Dark One? I don't know if I can get used to having a second voice inside my head." Naruto heard chuckling as the Dark One laughed. Naruto didn't know how, but somehow the darker side of himself found what he said to be amusing. This caused Naruto to smile softly. "Well, I have always been here, Naruto. Just before you were not fully ready for me to reveal myself to you." Naruto tilted his head at this. "You've always been here? Where? How come I never noticed you?" The Dark One sighed. "You always manage to ask more questions than anyone I've ever seen. I must keep in mind your age, it is common for young humans to ask many questions." While this entire conversation was going on between Naruto and the Dark One, the rest of the pack and Azar stared at Naruto with confused and concerned looks on their faces. They do not know who or what Naruto was talking to, and they were deeply concerned that going to the other side of the lake had made him lose it somewhat. His mom and dad began talking quietly, eventually coming to an agreement as his mom walked over to Naruto, who, in her eyes, seemed to be talking to himself. Naruto heard the paw steps and turned around to look at his mom as he smiled brightly at her. She smiled back and pulled Naruto close. "Pup, if you ever feel like you need a break, you are welcome to stop. You need to make sure you relax sometimes too." Naruto nodded in understanding and began speaking to himself again. Well, that's what everyone else thought. Eventually someone had to say something. It just so happened to be Azar who said it. "Naruto, who are you talking to?" When Naruto heard this, he laughed somewhat. Now that he thinks about it, he probably looks crazy right now. "I'm talking to the darker side of me. I just call him the Dark One since that's easier to say anyways." Everyone stares at Naruto a little confused, and Naruto points to his shadow. The Dark One. His shadow morphed slightly, forming a creature that had two heads and a demonic grin sped across its two faces. Empty eyes staring at them in shadow form. Everyone looked taken aback as they stared at Naruto's shadow. Azar, who had recognized what was going on, said nothing, sitting there trying to keep a look of indifference. Naruto's shadow morphed back to his normal one and he smiled at everyone. Then he turned around and began walking deeper into the woods. Everyone watched him, slightly confused as to what just happened. More or less they knew that Naruto had a dark power inside himself. They didn't think it would be in the form of another being. They watched in silence long after he was gone. Then Azar got up and ran after him. Everyone silently agreed that they would not let this affect their view of Naruto. He was still a part of the pack, so this should not change that. Everyone got up and went back to doing what they were doing before Naruto's arrival, which was securing the border. After they had heard about the humans coming tomorrow to attempt at killing them and stealing their pelts and meat, they decided to be extra cautious about what goes on in the forest. Now someone will have to take border patrol for the mornings, afternoons, and evenings. In case anything was seen or heard, they wanted to be ready. The Luna and Alpha both sat down in the middle of the field talking about ways to make the forest safer for their pack. Eventually the conversation made its way to the subject of Naruto. His aura is now awakened and he seems to have grown much stronger while he was away for those few hours. The Alpha agreed with the Luna's statement and added his own commentary into the mix. Yes, he has grown stronger physically and mentally. Yet he has yet to train with his power. His aura seems to glow much brighter though since he had left. I'm starting to think that Naruto's power doesn't have a limit to it. If that is the case, then what will happen when he taps into it more and more? The Luna looked over to where Naruto left and a look of concern graced her features. I hope he does not become consumed by the power he holds. If he does, what will happen to everyone in contact with him? Alpha nodded, pondering the questions that his mate brought up. I would just have to assume that we don't want to let it get there. We need to make sure that his power is evenly used. We must not let him just tap into the dark sides of his power. The Luna nodded and stood up. The Alpha standing up with her. The Luna rubbed up against her mate once, then nuzzled him slightly. I am going to go and watch our pup. I would like to see what he is up to. She then runs off in the direction that Naruto went in, following his scent to a deeper and darker parts of the woods. Once she got to where Naruto was, her eyes widened when she saw him holding a purple and black fireball in his hands. His back was turned to her so she could not see his expression. However, he seemed quite pleased with himself. He was tossing the fireball between his hands and laughing slightly as he played with it. He threw it high up into the air and caught it. Then he stopped what he was doing for a second, then nodded. He pulled his arm back as far as he could and then he threw the fireball at a tree. The tree burst into flame and quickly burned down, nothing but ashes remaining in its place. Naruto ran over to the spot where he burned down the tree and put his hands on the ground. He waited for a bit in that position before a green light engulfed his hands. The Luna watched silently as a new tree slowly grew from where the old one used to be. She was shocked, to say the least. He had only been training for a short period of time and yet he was already learning how to use his power. Once the tree was done growing into a full tree, Naruto stepped back and stared at it. It was a tall tree, taller than the one that was there before. Naruto didn't seem to mind though. He then ran up to the tree and tried climbing it. Without his hands, the Luna was confused as to how he would be able to do such but continued to watch regardless. Naruto got about halfway up the tree but then was flung off it violently. He crashed into another tree and groaned. He rubbed his head and got up once more and ran at the tree trying once again to climb it only to get the same result. The Luna watched as he continued this cycle. Each time however he would get farther and farther up the tree. However he did not make it to the top just yet. Naruto seemed to be growing tired and was panting heavily. Then the Luna saw something odd happen. Naruto began to glow. Then he slowly got up and as he did the glow died down. When it faded away Naruto seemed completely rejuvenated. He didn't look tired at all. The Luna was shocked. How did her pup learn such a technique? He replenished his strength without having to rest or take a single break. She watched as Naruto ran at the tree again, not slowing down even for a moment. He was getting very far up the tree now. Whenever he would get tired he would use that skill of his and his strength would be replenished. He continued this for hours until it got dark. Eventually he grew frustrated. He punched the tree in half. Wait, in half? The Luna looked fully shocked into awe at this. Since when could her pup do this? How much power does he hold? Naruto sat down and began to meditate. She watched as he breathed in and out slowly. She would have to guess that this calmed him. He sat like that for some time, not moving an inch. Then his eyes snapped open and he stood up, turning around and looking directly at the spot that the Luna hid in. She seemed taken aback by this. She had thought she had hidden quite well. She even masked her aura and scent so he wouldn't be able to find her. Yet somehow he still did. Naruto's eyes glowed brightly and he walked over to where she lay in the bushes calmly. The Luna looked around quickly, trying to find another spot to hide in. She soon came to realize that there were none. So she did the only thing she could think of. She turned tail and ran away. Naruto watched this in silence. He did not chase after her nor did he have any intention to. He could tell it was his mom and knew she had been there the whole time. Naruto walked back over to the tree and began to meditate again, keeping track of how far away his mom was from the rest of the pack. The Luna made it to the rest of the pack and everyone looked at her confused. She walked over to her mate and laid down next to him. He began comforting her as best as possible to calm her frayed nerves. She began to tell him what she saw when she went after Naruto and he listened to her in silence. Then he asked her something that she hadn't even thought about. "Alright mate, I understand. However, where was that little dragon that had run off with him earlier?" She looked at him as realization hit her. She didn't see him once while he was watching her pup. Where could that little dragon have gone off to and when? Naruto sat in silence as he meditated. He thought about what just happened and frowned. His mom, she looked scared almost. Like she feared what he could do. Isn't that what they wanted? For him to be strong and be able to fight and protect the forest? Why did she run? Was it something he did? Negative thoughts began to fill Naruto's mind. What if they didn't want him anymore? What if they would treat him like how his old family treated him? What if they hated him now and wanted nothing to do with him at all anymore? The more he thought about it, the more he grew upset. He didn't want them to hate him just because of what he is. Nor did he want to lose the first people that ever treated him right. Naruto stood up and held his hand out in front of himself. He then focused slightly and a purple and black ball of fire appeared in his hand. He then threw it at the tree and watched as it burst into purple and black flames. The flames died down and left nothing but ashes in its place. Naruto bent down and placed his hands on the ground and they glowed a vibrant green. The tree growing back in seconds. Naruto stood back and looked at the tree. First, he would make it to the top. Then he would go see his family. He needed to talk to them but he thought it would be better to give them space first before he decided to do anything at all. He didn't want to go and see them when they were all worked up. Naruto took a running start and ran up the tree. He got about a few feet up the tree and began to slip. He didn't use enough, he thought, and he fell from the tree and landed on his butt. He got up and shook off the leaves and dust that had gotten on him during the fall and ran at the tree again, bolting up it as he got a few feet further than his last attempt. However, this time he was viciously flung from the tree and landed head first into another tree across the way. He hit his head hard and fell to the ground. He didn't move for a bit, then slowly got up holding his head. It hurt a lot, more than when he hit his head before. He had used way too much this time. He was slightly dizzy and disoriented, but he got up slowly regardless. Running at the tree Naruto only made it a couple of feet before he fell back to the ground. He laid there, unmoving, just staring into the treetops. He thought about taking a break but knew that he shouldn't if he wanted to keep his family safe from those who want to hurt them. Though the pain in his head was only making him want to stop more. Regardless of that though, he sat up and sighed. Maybe you should learn how to heal yourself first. Naruto nodded and looked down slightly. So how do I heal myself, Dark? What do I do? Naruto stayed silent as the Dark One spoke. It is not at all complicated. In fact, you have pretty much already learned such a skill. Naruto seemed confused by this as he tilted his head somewhat, but immediately regretted it seeing as the throbbing pain in his head got worse with the movement. So when did I learn how to do this? Well, it's more like you're tapping into the same power. You have many different gifts and each of them has a certain color to go with them. Like when you grow the trees. Healing is another property that goes with that power. Along with growing things, you can also heal things. This includes yourself. Naruto nodded slowly and placed his hands on his head. He sighed and relaxed, thinking about how he grew the tree. He didn't have much to go off of, so this was his first guess. When Naruto still felt the pain, he sighed. Then he heard laughing. Naruto looked back to see that Azar had gotten back from the task he asked him to do earlier on, but for some reason he was on the ground laughing. A look of confusion came across Naruto's face as he looked at his friend. What's so funny? Naruto asked, only for Azar to point a claw at Naruto's head. Naruto still looked confused and then he heard chuckling. The Dark One was laughing as well. This caused Naruto to get frustrated. He wanted to know what they were laughing at and he wanted to know now. Naruto stood up and began walking back to the clearing in the forest that he had come to call home. He walked at a brisk pace, trying to ignore the laughing dragon that followed behind him along with the laughter of the Dark One. Naruto pushed any tree branches that threatened to hit him in the face out of the way. He made his way back into the clearing and everyone stopped and looked at him. Then some snickered while others broke out into laughter. Naruto grew an irk mark as he listened to all the laughing. Naruto quickly walked over to the lake and looked over into it. He stared at his reflection for a while. Then he frowned as his eyes widened and embarrassment flooded his system. His face flushed a deep red as he looked at the tree that was sticking out of his head. It had white leaves to match his hair and sat directly in the middle of his head. He had grew a tree on his head, a whole tree. It was small, sure, but it was a tree nonetheless. Naruto looked back at his pack members and pouted, balling his fists up at his sides as he stomped off back into the forest. He did not like being humiliated, but he knew that they didn't mean anything bad by it. He was still embarrassed though. His friend followed him back to the area with the tree Naruto grew in it. Naruto set his hands on fire. Then he used the purple and black flames to burn the small tree on his head. The flames can't burn him, so he didn't care. Once the tree was gone, Naruto dusted his head off to get rid of some of the ashes. He would take a bath later, but for now he would like to get to the top of the tree. Naruto looked back at Azar and motioned for him to come over. Azar complied and walked over. The whole time Azar had this little pouch on his side. Naruto reached into the pouch and pulled out a rock. Yep, a rock. Naruto smiled and nodded. This was exactly what the Dark One said he needed, so that way he could use it to make his weapon. Naruto thought it would be smart to have a weapon to use just in case he ever got too tired or just didn't feel like using his power. Naruto set his hands on fire again and the rock slowly heated up. Once it was hot enough, Naruto was able to break the rock apart. Inside the rock was a gray metal. Naruto smiled to himself and he pulled out a small little vial from Azar's pouch. Inside the vial was blue liquid. A key hung around the neck of the vial. It was a skeleton key. The Dark One said that it would be helpful to have such. It apparently can open up doors to any place. Just think about it and twist the key in the air, he said. Naruto took the key and put it in his pocket for future use. Naruto took the vial and used his teeth to open it up. He then poured it onto the hot metal. The liquid slowly seeped into the metal, making it glow a vibrant array of colors and then go back to gray. Then Naruto slowly infused his aura in the metal. This would make it so he could morph its shape to whatever he wanted. The metal began to hover slightly in Naruto's hands. The metal glowed again as it morphed through many different shapes. Then it settled into one shape, a bracelet. It had a small circular medal in the center of it. Inside the circle was a star. Many other small and intricate designs graced its features. Naruto smiled and put the bracelet on. He would be able to use this whenever he needed, and it could be any shape or form that he willed it to be. He decided that it needed a name. He decided to name it Skrios. I no speak dis language, just used Google Translate. It is Scottish Gaelic. I know random. Skrios, meaning destruction. He felt that would be fitting for a weapon. Naruto smiled and then turned back to the tree. He would begin training once more and try to get to the top of this tree. He wasn't going to stop until he did. Any breaks he took would be used to meditate and train to work with Skrios. Naruto ran back at the tree. He continued his ritual for hours. Running at the tree, sometimes stopping to meditate. It was a long process that went well into the night. Naruto eventually realized that it was dark out. The moon sat high in the sky and Naruto knew he was running out of time. Naruto stopped trying with the tree and decided that it was time to train using Skrios. He held out his arm with the bracelet on it and imagined it as a dagger. Naruto had set up training dummies to use earlier for this specific purpose. Naruto ran at the dummies, making different cuts along them. He kept going until the dummies were unusable. Naruto heard some chuckling and frowned, then looked over to a tree to see the darker version of himself sitting there. The Dark One had told Naruto already that he really couldn't appear in the day, or at least not that much. So he sticks to being in Naruto's mind majority of the time during the day, and at night he takes a more physical form. He's more of a walking shadow if anything. The Dark One disappeared and reappeared in front of Naruto. Naruto was not fazed by this, however, as he had grown accustomed to the random things that he would do. I don't think that will help you grow much stronger. You need a live target. Naruto nodded at this, agreeing with him. Hitting something stationary is easy. Hitting a moving target will be much more difficult. So where would I get a moving target at? Naruto asked, to which the Dark One sighed. Me, I would be your moving target. I am much stronger than anyone that could train you, so you would become very powerful training with me. Naruto nodded again and set the remains of the dummies on fire. He was beginning to really enjoy setting things on fire, and somehow he knows that that is a bad thing. Regardless of that thought, he still watched as the dummies burned into ashes and then blow away in the wind. You're going to have a real problem with fire, aren't you? The Dark One said, and Naruto looked back at him and smiled slightly. Naruto faced the Dark One and smiled. So when do we start? The Dark One chuckled and looked at Naruto. A grin was plastered on his face as he spoke. You wish to get stronger now, do you not? Naruto nodded and the Dark One grinned wider. Azar had sat down somewhere farther away and took a nap. Then now would be when we are starting. The Dark One said. Naruto didn't like that look of excitement he got in his eyes as he nodded slowly. This was going to be a long night. Walking to opposite sides of the field, Naruto and Dark One then turned and faced each other. Naruto looks at his counterpart nervously while Dark only grinned in response. This is going to hurt a lot, isn't it? The Dark One chuckled and looked Naruto in the eyes, causing a shiver to run down Naruto's back. Oh, this was going to be great. Naruto stared the Dark One down. He was not at all prepared to fight him. He just knew he was going to lose regardless, but he wanted to try anyways. Naruto was going to go down fighting then. Since I am nice, I will allow you to go first. Good luck. You're going to need it. The Dark One said, and Naruto nodded. The wind blew around them slowly, the moon shining brightly in the night sky as they stood there. No one dared to move or make a sound. The tension in the area grew to an overwhelming amount. Naruto was starting to get tired of just standing there and staring at each other. He knew, however, that he was being tested. If Naruto looked away for even a second, then he would leave many openings. Well, more openings than what he already has now. Naruto was beginning to think that eventually the Dark One would walk over and start dancing with him. He just kept staring at Naruto and it was starting to get creepy. Then without warning, Dark One sprinted at Naruto, catching him off guard as he quickly went to block his attack. The Dark One sent a kick aimed for Naruto's head and Naruto blocked it. The Dark One smiled darkly, then quickly sent another kick in Naruto's direction. Went to block it, but a fist connected with his face before he could. The Dark One faked that kick and used it to hide the punch that hit Naruto in the face. Naruto flew back a few meters and landed on the hard ground. He knew this was going to be hard, but couldn't he lighten it up a little on his face? Naruto focused back on the battle and got up slowly. Just to duck quickly again, just barely missing the kick aimed at him. "Hey, watch it." The Dark One chuckled again and started to walk around Naruto in a circle. A smirk evident on his face as he walked around Naruto. Naruto took a deep breath and watched Dark One closely. He was not about to make that mistake twice. Then Dark One raised his hand slowly. Naruto was confused by this. Why was he doing that? Then Naruto felt like something was approaching him and fast. Naruto jumped out of the way just to narrowly avoid a shadow spear. Naruto's eyes widened when he saw it. He wasn't able to look for long, though, seeing as Dark had then appeared in front of Naruto. He was in the air, so getting away wasn't an option, and a roundhouse kick was sent to his midsection. He tried his best to block it, but it still sent him flying and crashing to the ground. Naruto skidded across the ground until he came to a halt about 20 feet from where he was before. Naruto didn't dare move as he panted softly. He looked over to where Dark stood and growled softly. Then he stood up and bolted towards Dark. He was tired of playing offense and knew that Dark was just toying with him. Naruto aimed his dagger at Dark, hoping to hit him at least once. Dark dodged it easily and then sent another punch at Naruto's midsection. Naruto gasped and held his side as he stumbled back a few feet. Dark took this opening as a chance to lay another blow on Naruto. This time punching him in the face and sending him flying backwards. Naruto crashed into a tree, roughly causing it to snap in half at the contact. Naruto coughed up some blood and laid on the ground. Okay. So just running at him was not going to work, and he still got beat when he played offense. Naruto needed to figure out some way to beat him, and soon. He was not stopping until he won at least once. Naruto slowly stood up. He was tired, but not really at the same time. Maybe it was the adrenaline coursing through his veins that made him feel like such. Naruto, however, did not enjoy the slight pain he was in. He knew that his ribs were probably heavily bruised and that his face probably didn't look the best right now. Regardless though, Naruto carried on. He was going to win even if he had to get his ass kicked to do it. Naruto spit out some blood that was beginning to fill his mouth and walked back over to Dark. Naruto sent a determined glare at Dark and looked down at the dagger he held. Naruto breathed in and out, then slowly got into a battle stance. Whatever it takes, Naruto thought. Dark stood still, his face showing a mocking look, but Naruto knew better than to let him provoke him. Naruto ran at an alarming rate towards Dark, catching him off guard slightly. Naruto aimed his dagger at Dark's face and Dark went to block it just like Naruto wanted. Naruto quickly used this chance to send a punch towards Dark's stomach. The punch connected and Dark seemed caught off guard by the surprise attack. Naruto needed to keep Dark like this, so he sent another punch to Dark's face and Dark stumbled backwards slightly. Naruto took this chance and sent a kick aimed at Dark's face. Naruto's eyes widened when Dark stopped his kick dead in its tracks. Dark grinned as he chuckled slowly. Naruto had to think and fast, so he did the only thing he could think of. He changed his dagger into a bow. Now he did not know how to use it, of course, but it was the only thing he thought of that could get Dark to release him. Dark saw the bow and began to laugh louder. Naruto pouted slightly and quickly set up the bow and aimed it as best as he could at Dark's face, then he pulled BQCK back and fired. The laughter he heard before was cut off by a scream. Naruto looked to see that he had hit Dark in the eye with his arrow and it was now leaking out a black substance. Dark let go of Naruto and held his eye. Naruto took the chance to quickly get away from Dark. He knew he had made him angry with that little stunt of his, but now wasn't the time to worry about that. The arrow had disappeared and Dark was left standing there with his bleeding eye. He growled and disappeared just to appear in front of Naruto and stab his spear right through his chest. Naruto coughed up blood and looked at Dark. Shock completely written over Naruto's face and eventually on Dark's face too. He did not intend to hurt Naruto much. After all, Naruto was his host. He was staying in Naruto's body without his permission to begin with, and to top it all off, he had grown close with Naruto over the small period of time that they talked. Dark backed away slowly. He didn't remove the spear because he knew it would only cause more blood to be lost. Naruto didn't know how to heal himself yet, so Dark would have to somehow try and do it for him. Just when Dark was about to try to help his host, Naruto began to speak. "Da, RK. Dark's eyes widened when Naruto spoke. He was still surprised that he was even standing and didn't know how he was. Most people would have collapsed by now and even passed out. He was losing a lot of blood fast and Dark wanted to help, he just didn't know if he could help. Da. RK. Naruto repeated as he slowly made his way over to the darker version of himself. Dark looked taken aback. How was he even moving? Let alone standing? Dark watched as Naruto made his way over to Dark and then stood in front of him. Dark just stared at him speechless and unsure as to what he should do. Naruto grabbed the spear and pulled it out of his chest. Dark watched him, not able to say anything to stop him. Naruto then broke the spear in half and dropped its pieces to the ground in front of Dark. Then Naruto stood straight up and grinned at Dark. His eyes were hidden slightly so Dark could not see what they looked like. The wind picked up speed slightly and blew through the trees. Naruto still stood there grinning at Dark like he was not bleeding out from a wound in the middle of his chest. Regardless of that, Naruto chuckled. It wasn't a happy chuckle that Dark had gotten used to coming from Naruto's lips. No, this was a much darker chuckle. It scared Darm slightly. The chuckle started off low but slowly got louder until it turned into full-blown insane laughter. Dark had backed away at this point. He did not wish to know what had gotten into Naruto. He knew Naruto had a dark side, of course. Well, Dark was that side of him, but seeing Naruto like this put fear into his eyes. Naruto slowly looked up at Dark and what Dark saw scared him even more. His eyes. They were black, not a single shred of light in them. Dark slowly began to realize that he had messed up. He already knew such before, but this was even worse. A dark aura slowly covered Naruto's hands and slowly made its way over Naruto's weapon. It changing from a bow to a scythe. The dark aura covering it, making it glow slightly. Naruto's tattoos had reappeared on him and only helped make him look more dangerous. Naruto giggled madly and looked Dark straight in the eyes. Dark felt himself visibly shiver at the look Naruto gave him. Dark knew that he couldn't hold back anymore. He knew if he did, even just a little bit, it would get him killed. That thought frightened him more than anything. How could he possibly die? He has never run into someone that could match his power, let alone overpower him. He knew that he had given Naruto such a power, but that didn't explain how he was stronger. Then he remembered all the different colors Naruto's aura had. If he had only just the power Dark had given him, then he would only have a dark aura. It would have been black, but it was not just black. Dark realized that Naruto already had that power inside of himself. His own addition to his power was just merely a bonus for Naruto. Dark felt himself freeze up at such a realization. What was Naruto anyways? Just how strong was he? What did he have in store for Dark? These were all thoughts that ran through Dark's head as he stared down the 5-year-old. All Dark knew, however, was that he needed to calm Naruto down and fast. Dark stared Naruto down. He couldn't look away for 2 reasons. 1, it would get him killed if he did, and 2, Dark just couldn't look away from him. He feared Naruto's power more than anything in that moment, and something told him that this side of Naruto wasn't an idiot. I heard that he. Dark's eyes widened when he heard Naruto's voice say that. However, that was not what scared him the most about hearing him say that. What scared about hearing Naruto's voice was that it sounded like it came from right behind himself. Dark panicked and spun around quickly. He aimed a fist at where the sound came from but was surprised to see nothing behind himself. He turned his head back around quickly and saw that Naruto was gone. This put Dark on edge. Great. First he pisses him off and now he lost him, Dark thought sarcastically. Dark heard giggling, the kind you would hear a child make. He couldn't pinpoint where the sound was coming from because it sounded like it came from all around himself. The sound sent a shiver down his spine. Dark did not like this side of Naruto one bit. Darky, come play with me. Naruto said. When he had said play, it came out all distorted and mocking even. Naruto only thought of this as a game, while to Dark this was a life or death situation. Suddenly Dark felt a presence to his left and he quickly dodged the arrow that had come at him. The arrow just barely grazed his cheek, but that still concerned Dark. He could hit Dark without even using much effort. This child. He was like some sort of God's child. Dark had to admit that in all his years of being a demon he has never encountered a mortal stronger than him. Dark looked at the spot where the arrow came from. He was waiting for someone or something to move. As soon as it did he would go into attack. Dark felt another presence to his right, and yet again Dark just barely got away from an arrow. This time it grazed his arm. Black blood oozing out from his minor wounds. How did Naruto get to the other side of the field so fast? That shouldn't be possible without Dark at least catching some sort of small movement. Dark only grew more fearful when he felt another presence behind himself. He went to dodge it thinking it would be another arrow, but instead he was kicked violently across the field. He crashed through a few trees and landed on his side. That was going to leave a mark. Dark slowly got up, coughing up some blood as he glared at where Naruto stood in the middle of the field. Naruto simply rocked on his heels and giggled, a happy smile planted on his face. Dark stood up and slowly walked over to Naruto. He didn't want to provoke him any more than what he already has. Naruto, listen to me. You need to calm down some. I'm sorry for stabbing you. I overreacted and now you are too. It was just a small stab wound anyways. Dark said, then realized something. Him of all people. A demon. Just apologized to a mortal. Dark felt his pride take a hit on that one. He did not like being weak or feeling weak in comparison to others. Dark sighed and looked Naruto head on. Naruto doesn't know how strong he is. So why doesn't he just act a little? Naruto giggled again, silly Darky. I heard that too, why no? You can't trick me, haha. Naruto laughed and Dark's eyes widened. Did he just read his mind? Can Naruto do that? How? Where could he have gotten such a skill? Dark's confusion was cut short when a kick was sent at his face. Dark fell to the side and landed on the hard ground. He groaned softly and Naruto used his foot to kick Dark over onto his back. Then Naruto placed his foot on Dark's stomach and pressed down hard. Naruto didn't stop till he heard the satisfying sound of Dark's ribs breaking. Dark coughed up more blood and looked at Naruto. A sadistic grin was placed on Naruto's face as he looked at Dark like some old toy. Naruto took his scythe and raised it above his head. Hee, this has been fun, Darky, but it's about time I take what's left of that soul of yours. Dark's eyes widened and he shook his head quickly. If that were to happen, he would die. For good. As long as a being had their soul, they could come back. Dark knew this fact all too well. He has had many close calls in his lifetime and many times has gotten very close to death. Yet he made sure to keep his soul intact. However, those close calls came with a price. This is why Dark needs a host. He is merely a shadow now, but with a host he can take a more physical form when certain constraints are met. Such as it needing to be night. Along with this, Dark's physical form is much weaker and, if not careful, his body can easily be torn apart. His soul had a few nicks and cuts, but nonetheless it is still usable. Naruto giggled at Dark's reaction to his words. The more souls a being eats, the stronger they can grow. So of course Naruto would want more power. It's what he wanted all this time. The thought of it all left a sweet taste in Naruto's mouth. He wanted power. He needed it. He craved it with every fiber of his being. He was tired of being weak. Tired of being the one who laid in the dirt. The dead last of everything. Now he could be better than all of them. He could have it all. Naruto stared down at Dark, grinning madly. He knew Dark wanted to live. He knew that Dark was afraid to die. This was why this was so fun to Naruto. He loved the look of fear in his eyes. He loved how he knew that this would be the end of himself, yet he tried anyways. It's okay, Darky. I'll be gentle. That sounds really dirty, I know. Dark squirmed under Naruto's foot. Naruto giggled at the sight. He wanted to get out and get away so badly. Too bad that won't be happening anytime soon. Bye-bye, Darky. It was fun while it lasted. Naruto brought the scythe down quickly, but just before it could connect with Dark, a large purple mass crashed into himself and pinned him to the ground. Dark and Naruto looked in shock to see Azar had woken up and that he had noticed Naruto's condition. Azar growled at Naruto and Naruto giggled in return. Azar only growled louder, causing Naruto to giggle louder and louder until it turned into full-blown insane laughter. Azar continued to look at Naruto with a hard look. Naruto, who didn't seem to have a care in the world, gave him a mocking look. Dark slowly got up and limped over to Azar and Naruto. If he has a small chance at being able to force Naruto to sleep. Hopefully he'll be fine when he wakes up. Dark got over to Naruto and sat down next to them. Naruto looked over to Dark and gave him a sadistic grin, giggling slightly as he spoke. Putting me to sleep, are we? That's your brilliant plan? Ha 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 ha. Why don't you come back when you actually have something smart to do? Dark ignored the mocking and continued with his plan regardless. Placing his index and middle finger on the top of Naruto's head, Dark breathed in and out slowly. It wouldn't work if he was all worked up. Dark slowly began to mutter words, in a language that Naruto couldn't hear fully, under his breath. A look of confusion came across Naruto's face as he tilted his head at him. What was he doing? Naruto didn't think much about it until his eyes began to droop slightly. Naruto soon realized that these weren't just some fancy words that Dark was saying. Naruto immediately began to fight against the lulling pull of sleep. His efforts, however, were more or less futile. Azar didn't move an inch due to Naruto's growing fatigue. Naruto growled and tried to kick Azar off, but such an attempt proved to be useless. Naruto slowly lost his will to continue as sleep became more and more of a reality. Naruto's hands fell to his side as his breathing slowed. Naruto's eyes began to close and he frowned. He did not want to sleep. He wanted to have fun. He wanted to get back at Dark for stabbing him. He needed to. Naruto's eyes slid closed as he fell into a peaceful slumber. Azar and Dark watched the sleeping boy intently. They both were worried about him. However, they were equally as scared as to what they had awakened. The fear they had felt was unreal. Dark more than Azar, who had woken up at the end and saw what had happened. However, they both knew that this was not the end. That things would only get harder from here on out and that there was nothing they could do about it. Azar slowly picked Naruto up on his back and began the long journey back to the clearing in the center of the forest. Day would be approaching soon and they wanted to get back before then. However, it would take them some time. Dark followed behind Azar closely. If Naruto wakes up and is not better, then he will have to try and use the spell again, but he knows that such would be difficult. Naruto already knows the spell and would put up more of a fight than what he did last time. Dark could tell that Naruto wasn't even trying. He knew that if Naruto put in just a little bit more effort he could overpower them both easily. If that happens, then trying would be useless. They walked in silence on the way back. Every now and again Dark would look at Naruto every now and again, checking up on his condition as to whether or not he was awake. If he was and was just faking sleep, then it would end badly for them. What if he was just waiting for them to take him back to the center of the forest? Even though he thought such things, then it would raise more questions. Why would he wait? Doesn't he know how to get back already? He could just go there himself, right? Then more questions. What if he is just waiting so we don't try to stop him? What if he kills us when we get close? What will he do to the others? These thoughts constantly chased themselves around in circles, and the more Dark thought on the simple notion of if Naruto was asleep, the more it put him on edge. He had nearly tripped a few times due to such a distraction. He was scared, still very scared because of what happened. Naruto, no, that thing was terrifying. Dark had never seen anything like it. He had never felt such fear before. He was not prepared for whatever that was to wake up. Dark ran his hands through his hair and let out a shaky breath. He just didn't want whatever just happened to happen again. He had to make sure. If he did, he wouldn't be able to guarantee that he could stop it a second time. Dark looked at the area around them. The forest was dense, it was dark, but most of all, it was quiet. Dark was more than put off by such. Usually the forest is alive at night. However, somehow, this night was different. It was so quiet that Dark could hear himself breathe, which shouldn't be the case when he didn't really do such much as it is. Dark sighed heavily and tried to clear his head of the thoughts. They were getting the better of him and it frustrated him. He shouldn't have to feel like this. Not to anyone, and definitely not to a mortal. It made him feel weak in comparison. Once back at the clearing, Dark and Azar looked around. Everyone was asleep. This may be a good or bad thing. However, Dark ignored his growing anxiety and watched as Azar brought Naruto over to his parents. Azar laid him down next to them and then curled up next to Naruto. The dragon took one last look at his friend, then closed his eyes and went to sleep, leaving Dark alone with his thoughts. This somehow scared Dark. After everything he was thinking of before they got back, he was concerned about his thoughts getting the better of him. Dark walked over to a tree across the field and sat down, making sure to keep his eyes trained on where Naruto slept peacefully. He would stay up and keep watch. He didn't trust Naruto's sleeping figure one bit. He wasn't asleep, he was just faking, waiting for when he would let his guard down. Then he would attack him and steal his soul like he said, Dark thought. He was not going to let that happen though. He was going to sit here and watch Naruto until daybreak. Then he would return to being a shadow and Naruto wouldn't be able to hurt him. Dark laughed slightly to himself. He had one in his head. This made the most sense. He wouldn't be able to catch him off guard if he watched him the whole time. Dark smirked and watched Naruto sleep. It was close to morning anyways. He wouldn't be waiting long regardless. Sure, he was tired, but he could tough it out. This was a life or death situation in his mind. So if a little less sleep meant being able to live another day, then Dark would take it. Dark adjusted himself slightly so he was more comfortable. He gazed upon Naruto and jumped slightly when he saw him move. Naruto turned over and snuggled closer to his mother and sighed softly. Dark sweat dropped and sighed. Maybe he was overreacting slightly. This was Naruto he was talking about. He wasn't that dangerous, nor could he possibly beat a demon who has been around for many more lifespans than any mortal would live. Dark nodded and continued to watch Naruto. He had to be right, he just had to. Whatever happened to Naruto was just some fluke. He wasn't really that strong, he was just pretending to be. Dark could beat him any day. Hey, he could. Yes, 100% could. Dark kept reminding himself of such a fact. He was strong. He could easily beat him. No sweat. Flashbacks of the battle that Naruto and him had came to his mind. Dark tried to shake the visions he was getting, but they wouldn't leave him alone. Then thoughts were like the plague. He kept looking at Naruto nervously. His anxiety was beginning to build again. Then he heard a sound behind himself. He whipped his head around and looked deep into the forest. He saw a quick shadow flash past the corner of his vision and he quickly stood up. He felt panic rise in his chest and his fear grew. He kept staring into the forest, then remembered the reason he was staying up in the first place and quickly turned his head around back to see if Naruto was there. When he didn't see him, he began to panic. He was gone. How? He thought he had put Naruto to sleep. How could he possibly be gone? Dark was beginning to panic as he backed away from the spot he stood in. He was gone. What else was there for him to understand? Dark heard giggling behind himself and he quickly turned around and aimed a shadow spear at that area. He came up empty-handed and panted heavily. Where was he? How was he even doing that? Darky, tilde, you should have been paying attention, silly. Tilde. Dark's eyes widened and he stood completely still. The fear in his bones made it impossible for him to move. Dark watched as Naruto slowly materialized in front of him, a sadistic grin on his face. Is little ol' Darky afraid of me? Tilde? Naruto giggled and slowly walked towards Dark. Dark stood there and watched Naruto slowly touch his face. A cold feeling washed over Dark and he shivered. Dark looked over to where the others were and surprised to see corpses in their place. He killed them. Naruto killed the only family that took care of him. The only family that took care of both of them. What? Dark was in complete shock. He never imagined Naruto would kill them. Just a few days ago he wanted nothing more to protect them. What had changed in such a little amount of time? Naruto looked over to where Dark was looking at the bodies. Naruto giggled softly and began to walk over to the bodies. Like what I did, Darky. Tilde, I worked hard to make them look pretty. Naruto said as he grabbed his mother's face and held it up for Dark to see. The deformed face of his mother made Dark sick. One of her eyes hung wee of its socket. A yellowish pus had slowly began to fill the space in her eye as it bled profusely. Her jaw was snapped and hung limply as it barely clung to the rest of her head. Her fur was covered in cuts and blood, one of her ears being completely gone. Dark couldn't look away from the gruesome scene. He did not expect this and was more than scared at this point. Naruto dropped her head and dusted his hands off, giggling as he did so. Don't worry, Darky, Tilde, you won't have to look at this much longer. Tilde? Naruto grinned darkly at Dark and he shivered. Naruto snapped his fingers and slowly the bodies stood up one by one. Organs and body parts hung off the corpses, but they didn't seem to notice as they began to walk towards Dark. Dark slowly began to back away, finally getting the courage to move once more. Naruto stood watching and laughing. Get Darky. Go on, get him, Naruto said cheerfully, and the bodies picked up the pace. Dark's eyes widened and he quickly turned around and bolted into the forest. Dark could hear Naruto's dark laughter and the growls of the dead bodies from behind himself. This only made him run that much faster. Dark looked back to see the corpses chasing him. They were gaining ground on him. He had to think of something or he would get killed. Why wasn't it morning yet? That was his surefire way at getting away from all of this. Dark made shadow spears come out of the ground behind himself. He heard a yelp and knew that he had hit one of them. He didn't know if that killed it or just slowed it down, but he didn't want to try and check. He only ran faster away from the approaching beasts. Dark stumbled slightly over an exposed tree root and quickly regained his footing. He heard the growls and snarls getting closer and panicked more. So this was it. He was going to die, wasn't he? Dark felt one of the dead wolves nip at his feet and he panicked, tripping and falling to the ground. He slid a few feet and groaned. Dark looked to see the corpses had caught up to him and they stood over him growling. Then Naruto slowly walked over and stood over him. Dark looked Naruto in the eyes, pleading silently as Naruto giggled. Looks like this is the end of the line, Darky. Tilda. Dark whimpered slightly and began to beg Naruto. Please Naruto. Don't do this. I am sorry for what I did. Naruto only giggled and snapped his fingers again, causing the corpses to attack Dark mercilessly. Dark screamed in pain as he felt his body being torn apart. Naruto only laughed at Dark's pain and watched as Dark was ripped apart. Dark had never been through such a pain. This was something he would do to others, not get it done to himself. Dark screamed louder and louder as his body was torn and ripped. So this was what it felt like to die. It felt horrible. Dark remembered all the things he had done in his life as the stench of blood filled the air. The pain slowly began to numb and Dark's screams slowly died out. The horrible sound of his flesh being ripped apart being all that filled his ears. Red blood pooled around Dark and his breathing slowed. Wait, red blood? His blood was black. How could it be red now? That didn't make any sense. The more Dark thought on it, the more he noticed little things that just didn't seem right. How did Naruto get behind him if he watching him the whole time? Plus he didn't see Azar anymore. Along with this eternal night. Dark squinted his eyes as he looked at the moon. It was full, yet it did not move 1 inch in the sky. The forest stayed quiet, which shouldn't be the case. Dark's eyes widened as he came to a sudden realization. This wasn't real. None of this is real. The world around him slowly faded to black, leaving just him and Naruto there. Dark looked down at his body and saw that all the wounds he had gained had disappeared. He stood up slowly and looked at Naruto. Naruto smiled sweetly back at him. Looks like you figured it out, Darky. Part of me was wondering when you would. I'm not as good at creating these little nightmares like you are. Or at least doing such and being in it as well. It takes a lot of focus for me to keep them up. However, by the seams of it, you wouldn't have figured out if I had remembered the color of your blood. If I had, you may not have realized that all of this was fake. I will have to get back at these kinds of things, Naruto said, giggling slightly. Dark merely nodded and stared at Naruto. How though? I never taught you this. Dark replied. A look of shock resided on his face. How? I just picked it up when you stabbed me. When you did, I somehow unlocked this power. When I did, I was transported to this place. I didn't know what was going on at first. I was still pretty upset that you had stabbed me. I wanted you to feel what I felt. Then slowly the world began to materialize around me. Right where we left off. I could get my wish. So that's what I did. I transported you here without your noticing and then did as I pleased. Dark nodded slowly and then his eyes widened. So all of that wasn't real? Well, you did stab me, but everything after that didn't happen. Hey, with a little more practice I would surpass you in this skill, Naruto said, and Dark looked away. He didn't want to admit it, but he was right. Naruto did what took him ages to do. Only with a few mistakes. Dark's first time he did this was horrible. Nothing looked as real as what it did when Naruto did it. It took years to get where Dark is now, and Naruto nearly did just as well as himself, and it only took him a few minutes. It made Dark feel weak. He growled softly to himself and scoffed. Just take me out of this nightmare. Naruto nodded but suddenly grew very serious. Something that scared Dark. I will release you, however. Naruto teleported in front of Dark and gave him an insane look. Do what you did again and I will make sure you live in an eternal nightmare. The way Naruto said it made Dark shiver and nod. He stepped away slightly and then Naruto smiled brightly. Okay, thank you, Dark. Naruto snapped his fingers and Dark sat up gasping. He looked over to see Naruto standing up slowly. His wound was completely gone and Dark was somewhat confused. Naruto saw this and shrugged. I figured out how to heal myself while you were busy in that dream. Dark nodded and slowly stood. He looked up to the sky and saw morning approaching. He looked down at himself and saw that he was slowly fading. He was returning to a shadow. He looked over at Naruto once and saw that he was waking up Azar. Dark looked down at the ground and looked away. He sighed as he slowly walked over to Naruto and disappeared. Naruto's shadow returning to him once again. Naruto looked down at his shadow and smiled. His shadow smiled back and Naruto nodded. Azar yawned beside Naruto and they both began to walk back to the clearing. Today was the day Naruto would have to protect his family. He felt that he was more than ready to do so too. This was going to be fun. Finally making it back to the clearing, Naruto looks around at his sleeping family. He smiled softly and walked over to his parents. Careful not to wake any of them up, he kissed their foreheads. He wanted to protect them with his life. He was going to, he would happily die for this forest and all of its residents. Naruto didn't know when those children would get here and just how many are actually coming. Would they bring adults too? If so, how many? Naruto wasn't really concerned about that. What concerned him is who was coming. What if they brought ninja here? Naruto didn't really think he would do too well against someone much more experienced than himself. He easily held his own against Dark and he is much stronger than what anyone could be. So maybe he'll be alright. Plus he could always lock the person in their own personal nightmare for a little while. It would be good practice for Naruto anyways. But he wouldn't know anything about the person. How could he get any part of their life right if he didn't know who they were? Naruto looked to his shadow and bent down. Crouching down and staring at his shadow. Hey, Dark, you awake? Naruto heard a groan come from his mind, letting him know that Dark was awake, or at least he was awake now. What is it, Naruto? Came Dark's sleepy response. Is there some way I can get to someone's memories without them realizing it? So that way if I lock someone in a nightmare I would know more about their life. Two eyes opened up in Naruto's shadow and a mouth made itself visible as well. Well, I don't really know, Naruto. I've never been able to do such. The only reason my nightmare for you is good was because I have been with you your entire life. Naruto nodded and sighed. So far his chances were looking a little slim for that plan. However, why don't you test out some more of your powers? I feel as though you can do such. That is only because I saw that tattoo you had gotten of the solar system. That is usually a symbol of knowledge. So I do not doubt that you couldn't figure it out. Naruto nodded again and looked over to his pack. He wanted to try and see what he could do, but he did not wish to wake them up. Nor did he want to ruin their dreams by trespassing in them. He would have to find another subject to test such on. Okay, thank you, Dark. I will figure something out. Sorry for waking you up. The shadow closed its eyes and seemed to nod slightly. It is all right. However, I should warn you about the presence I feel approaching. I feel multiple. Naruto nodded and smiled in thanks. Yay, I felt them too. They felt no different from the ones I usually feel, so I ignored them. The shadow smiled a wide grin and then returned to being a normal shadow. Its eyes closing and mouth disappearing. Naruto took this as some sign of approval and stood up. He looked over to the direction of the chakra signatures and sighed. They were next to nothing and their aura was plain, letting him know that these were normal people he was dealing with. Naruto breathed in and out slowly. He focused himself and his powers. He should be able to just scare them off. Hopefully without any trouble. Naruto jumped up into the treetops and began jumping from tree to tree in the direction of the chakra signatures. He was going to stop them before they even got deep into the forest. He didn't want them in his territory. Nor did he want them to tell someone else what happened and they come here. If they saw his pack, then they would come back for sure. Naruto quickly approached the chakra signatures and made sure to keep quiet. He did not want to get discovered without any need. When he figures out how to access memories, then he can just erase someone's memories if they see him. Naruto heard talking and slowed down some. He looked over to see a group of kids with all different kinds of weapons and tools that would be used to kill and skin his family. Naruto growled softly at the sight of them. He was more than angry that some humans thought that they could hurt his pack. He wanted nothing more than to put them in their place. However, he had to remind himself that these kids were only just a little bit older than himself. Yet they were less experienced by a long shot. Hurting them would not help the situation at all. Naruto listened in on their conversation. Now all we need to do is find those wolves and we'll be set. One boy said. There were 3 boys and 2 girls. Naruto recognizes the 2 boys from last time there. However, he did not know who the third was. Nor did he know who the girls were. I can't wait. This is so exciting, a girl said. She was jumping up and down excitedly. The other girl pushed up her glasses and nodded, smiling. She was holding the tools that would be used to skin Naruto's family. These are wolves though. They're dangerous. We have to still be careful. Another boy said. Oh, lighten up. What can a few wolves do anyways? They aren't very smart. Everyone muttered in agreement and they all started to walk deeper into the forest. Naruto changed his bracelet into a bow and arrow. He wants to scare them off as best as possible. This being the first thing he thought of. Naruto fired the arrow at a tree where the group was walking by, successfully getting their attention as they all stopped to look at the arrow. Was that always there? The girl with glasses asked shakily. One of the boys shrugged and continued walking. The rest of the group followed, probably because they didn't wish to be left behind. However, Naruto had no intention of letting them get any further. He was willing to make his presence known without being seen, firing another arrow this time at a tree in front of them, so they can see that it wasn't there before. The group stops and everyone jumps in panic except for the one boy who had continued on ahead regardless of the arrow that was shot. Naruto was growing annoyed with that boy. He didn't like his attempts being ignored, let alone by some kid. Naruto took out 3 arrows this time. He fired all 3 at the ground in front of the boy. This time, the boy stopped. Naruto smiled in triumph, then watched as the boy turned around and yelled into the forest. Whoever you are, I'm not afraid of you. Only a coward would hide from a battle. The boy had been holding a dagger and seemed determined to press forward. He held his dagger out and narrowed his eyes. His friends, however, seemed to be pretty scared. Maybe we should go be back. Whatever I is here, D doesn't want to stay around, the girl without glasses said. She was holding on to a spear tightly. However, this was not very threatening due to the fact that she was shaking. Why yay? No reason to stay if we aren't wanted, a boy said, agreeing with the girl who spoke. The other 2 nodded in agreement and the boy grew irritated with them. No, we aren't some babies. We can handle this just like the grown-ups do. If you're so scared, then just go home. The other kids looked at each other, then turned around and ran home. The remaining boy scoffed. Fine, be that way, you bunch of babies. Naruto smiles proudly to himself. That was 4 of the kids already gone. Now he just needed to get the last one to leave and then problem solved. The boy walked further into the forest and Naruto quickly followed after him, careful to not make any sound when he did so. He shot more arrows at the boy in hopes of stopping him but ended up coming up empty-handed. Eventually Naruto had had enough of this kid, so Naruto shot an arrow. At the rate it was going, it would hit the kid in the leg. This would surely get him to stop regardless. However, his arrow was deflected by a kuni. Naruto's eyes widened when he saw it. There was no way that could have come from one of those kids. So who could have thrown it? Naruto heard the kids talking to someone and turned to see a silver-haired ninja. Geez kid, you're more trouble than the Hokage's son, the silvered-haired nin said. He wore a face mask that covered the bottom half of his face. Then his headband covered one of his eyes. He stood tall and confident, rubbing the back of his head as the boy turned around to look at him. You should really watch yourself, kid. You nearly got shot by that arrow from whoever is in that tree. Naruto growled softly to himself. He didn't expect to get found out, or at least not so soon. Well, why don't you come out? I mean, I nearly didn't see you there. If you hadn't fired that arrow, I wouldn't have found you. Naruto backed away slowly and was about to retreat, but the nin looked at the spot he was hiding in and Naruto knew that there was no use in running. Naruto jumped down to the ground from the spot he was in and everyone looked surprised at him. None of them expected to see a wolf boy appear. The kids didn't know who he was, but the nin knew him well. He was known as the Hokage's missing son, the one he was told to watch over. Yet he was constantly sent on missions, so he never got to see Naruto much. When he did, however, he usually just saw him in his room by himself. Yet when he came back from a mission about a week or so ago, he heard that Naruto had disappeared. A search party was sent out for him for a few days, but eventually everyone gave up and forgot about him the next day. Something that had confused the nin greatly. However, there was many differences from when Naruto ran away to now. Before he had yellow hair and didn't have wolf ears and a tail. "And Naruto? What happened to you?" Naruto was surprised he was recognized. He didn't talk to anyone or have any friends before he left. How could this person know him? Naruto ignored that and glared at the group. "Leave." It was a simple request, but it held so much venom to back it up. The kids paled Slout T and the girls clung to the nin's pant legs. The boys backed away. Slout T and the one who Naruto nearly shot pointed his dagger at Naruto. Naruto didn't feel threatened by such a thing and only looked at the boy with little interest. "I don't know what you are, but I'm not afraid of you." Naruto rolled his eyes and looked at the nin. "Leave, now," Naruto repeated as he glared at the group. The girls clung to the nin tighter and Naruto heard a battle cry come from his left. The nin realized what was going on just as quickly as Naruto did and attempted to stop the boy, but the two girls that held onto him made it hard for him to stop the child. "No, wait," the nin yelled in an effort to stop him. The boy tried to attack Naruto but was stopped quickly by Naruto. Naruto had grabbed the boy's hands and flipped him over onto his back, pinning him easily. The nin seemed surprised by this. He had thought that Naruto wasn't trained before? How did he stop the boy? Naruto growled down at the boy and turned his bow into a dagger and pointed it at the boy's neck. Fear filled the boy's eyes as he looked at Naruto. The nin looked shocked at Naruto. He wasn't known to be violent either. He was actually quite peaceful, usually drawing in his room. So what changed now? Then Naruto frowned. He got up off the boy and turned around. "Leave now, or else I will remove you myself. Which will end with death if you continue forward," Naruto said, his eyes glowing a dark glow. He was reacting to the boy's fear and knew that staying would mean death for him. He was trying his best to control himself. "Naruto, wait. Your parents were looking for you. They are worried sick about you. They want you to come home," the nin said, trying to stop Naruto from leaving. "No," Naruto said darkly. Then he bolted off into the forest, leaving the nin and the scared children behind. If they continued to trespass in his territory, then Naruto would use more drastic measures to stop them. Hopefully they would take what he said as a warning and leave. The nin, however, would not stop here. He would become a big part of Naruto's life very soon. Both completely unaware to this fact. There was nothing they could do to change such anyways. It all depends on how they react to such a change though. THSTA all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.